Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck 238 and it's titled Who Needs a Mana Curve Anyway? And if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. This week, our random card was suggested to us by Spacetime over on Reddit, and that card is Blast of Genius. And Blast of Genius is 4 blue, red for a sorcery, choose any target, draw 3 cards, then discard a card. Blast of Genius deals damage equal to the discarded card's converted mana cost to that permanent or player. So essentially, this allows us to, for 6 mana, draw a total of 3 cards, but we discard a card, so we're going up 2 cards, which is not great for 6 mana at sorcery speed, so we need to find a way to make that discard relevant. And so with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about our commanders and see what they are going to do for us. And yes, I did say commanders, because we have 2 this week with the partner pairing of Vial Smasher the Fierce and Brinelin the Moon Kraken. Starting off with Vial Smasher, the main reason that I wanted to have partners in the command zone. Vial Smasher is 1 black-red for a 2/3 legendary creature Goblin Berserker. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, choose an opponent at random, and Vial Smasher the Fierce deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to that player or planeswalker that player controls. Then, of course, obviously, it has partner, so we also have Brinelin the Moon Kraken, which is a massive 6 blue for a 6/8 legendary creature Kraken. When Brinelin enters the battlefield, or whenever you cast a spell with mana value 6 or greater, you may return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and it once again has partner. So with these 2 combined, they both really want us to be casting very expensive spells, preferably spells that cost 6 or more, which Blast of Genius is, and since Blast of Genius wants us to discard a card that is also expensive, it means that it plays very well with our commanders. Now with all of that being said, let's move on and talk about some of the themes for this deck and what exactly we're trying to do. Starting off with our first theme, it is of course kind of caring about that expensive mana value, as we've already mentioned, so nothing too surprising here. But as an example of what I'm talking about, we have Protection Racket, which is 2 and a black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, repeat the following process for each opponent in turn order. Reveal the top card of your library. That player may pay life equal to that card's mana value. If they do, exile that card. Otherwise, put it into your hand. This is by far one of the best cards for this deck because it doesn't stop us from drawing our normal card for the turn. But if our opponents are too worried about taking damage, we could wind up drawing an additional 3 cards every go around the table. Now that's probably not going to happen, but it definitely gives our opponents a big choice to make, because if they are deciding to take, say, 7 life versus letting us draw a card, there are going to be a lot of situations where we are able to draw the card because our opponents don't want to lose that much life. And if this is happening every single turn, eventually it's going to whittle down life totals or put us in a position where we have too many cards for our opponents to deal with and hopefully win us the game. Moving on to our second theme, we of course need to make that work, so we have incredibly expensive spells. And the best example, because it is the most expensive spell we have, is Shadow of Mortality at a whopping 13 black for 15 total mana value. It's a 7/7 avatar, and if your life total is less than your starting life total, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the difference. So if we've lost 13 life throughout the course of the game, so we're down to 27, we could cast this as a 2 mana 7/7, but honestly, that's not why it's here. It's actually here for Protection Racket, for Vial Smasher, for Brinelin. It is a great way to deal 15 damage to any target with Blast of Genius. And if we can just pay 6 mana, draw 3 cards, discard a card, do 15 damage to something, that is very worth it in my opinion, especially because that 15 damage can be pointed at an opponent's face. It can kill creatures, specifically commanders that might be in the way. It can deal a lot of damage. So we really loaded up on those expensive spells, which leads me back to the title of our video. We don't really have much of a mana curve. We kind of just have a giant wall of a curve at the end of where we really want that curve to be. And then, of course, finally, moving to our last theme of the deck, the thing to tie it all together is discard. Because Blast of Genius wants us to discard a card, we have ways to get those cards back with things like Containment Construct, which is 2 mana for a 2/1 artifact creature construct. Whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. If you do, you may play that card this turn. This is one of those cards that doesn't look like it would do too much, but there's actually quite a few cards in Magic that specify that you can discard a card to deal that much damage to an opponent. So if we can still use those cards after discarding them, then our deck is going to get significantly better and give us some actual win conditions. So that's one of the main reasons we wanted to focus on that discard matters strategy. That, though, brings us to the end of our themes for this week. And the next thing we're going to do is, of course, take a look at some key cards in the deck. And these are cards that really synergize with what we're trying to do, and in a lot of cases are kind of the MVPs of the deck, the most valuable cards that we've got, not in terms of cost, but in terms of playability. And starting with our first key card, we have Marvo Deep Operative, which is 3 blue-black for a 1/8 legendary creature octopus rogue. Whenever it attacks, clash with defending player, and whenever you win a clash, draw a card. Then you may cast a spell from your hand with mana value 8 or less without paying its mana cost. This is an incredible value engine for this deck. When we're clashing with an opponent, we are revealing the top card of our library, and then whoever has the higher mana value wins the clash. Because we're all about higher mana value, we will almost always be winning the clash, and then we can cast a spell from our hand with mana value 8 or less for free. And that is the vast majority of our deck. Obviously, we talked about Shadow of Mortality. There are definitely some more expensive cards in here, but most of our big hits are going to be at the 6, 7, and 8 drop slots. Moving on to our next key card. This one is Baneful Omen. And Baneful Omen is 4 black, black, black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you may reveal the top card of your library. If you do, each opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value. So this is one of those cards that doesn't actually draw us additional cards, but we do have some ways to kind of manipulate the top card of our library. And by doing that, we can make sure we have something very expensive on top to make each opponent lose life equal to its mana value. And if we're doing that, we can very quickly end the game, because there's a chance we drain our opponents for 10 plus every single turn. And if we're doing that, then I don't really know what they're going to be able to do to stop us. And then finally, we move to our last key card of the deck, which is Combustible Gearhulk. And this is a card that I knew I wanted to put into this deck when I started building it, but I had no idea that it was going to be as good as it is. Combustible Gearhulk is 6 mana, so 4 red red, for a 6/6 artifact creature construct, has first strike. When it enters, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If they don't, you mill 3 cards. Then this creature deals damage to that player equal to the total mana value of those cards. Most of the time, I was going to say all the time, but most of the time, our opponents are going to let us draw the cards. Because if they've seen what we are doing with this deck, they know we have very expensive spells. There is legitimately a chance that if they have us mill, they take 20 plus damage and can knock themselves right out of the game. Now, with that being said, there is also a chance that we just hit 3 lands and someone takes no damage, so it is very much a toss-up. but because of the high mana value we have in this deck, it is very likely we will get to draw 3 cards when it enters, and a 6 mana 6/6 first strike that draws 3 is actually a very powerful card. So I think for all those reasons, Combustible Gearhulk is definitely the key card of this deck. That, though, brings us to the end of our key cards for today. So the next thing I want to do is take a look at some cool interactions in the deck. And these are cards that really synergize with each other, but in a lot of cases are just fun cards that I want to highlight. Starting off with our first cool interaction, we have Commit to Memory and Skitterbeam Battalion. So starting off with Commit to Memory, Commit is 3 and a blue for an instant. Put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library, second from the top. Then Memory is 4, blue as a sorcery, and it has Aftermath, so we can only cast it from our graveyard. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7. Skitterbeam Battalion is 9 mana for a 4/4 artifact creature construct with trample, haste, and when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, create 2 tokens that are copies of it. But it also has Prototype, so we can cast it for 3 red and get a 2/2 version of the same creature. Now, looking at this, you might be wondering how exactly these two interact, and one of the best ways that this works is that we can actually commit our own Skitterbeam Battalion after we have put it into play. So if we cast Skitterbeam Battalion for, we'll say, the total of 9, we get 3 4/4 trample haste creatures. We can then commit it, put it second from the top of our library. We then know we have a 9-drop in the top 2 cards of our deck, meaning that anything that deals damage based on the top of our library is definitely going to be dealing a ton of damage, and we could eventually just draw it again, cast it again, and get 3 more 4/4s with trample and haste. So yes, this is very convoluted, and yes, this is very mana intensive. However, I do believe that this is worth doing simply to get a 9-drop that leaves something behind back on top of our library. So we are still getting some bodies out of it. We're not just spinning our wheels. We are putting cards on top of our deck to deal damage. And then eventually, when we need memory, we can shuffle everything back in and just go again. So because of that, I wanted to highlight these 2 cards. I think this is a very fun interaction. Whether it's good or not, I'm not 100% sure, so let me know in the comments what you think. Moving on to our next cool interaction, though. This one, we've got Time Sifter and Hidetsugu Devouring Chaos. So Time Sifter is a card that I really debated against putting into this deck. It is 5 mana for an artifact. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, each player removes the top card of their library from the game. The player who removed the card with the highest mana value takes an extra turn after this one. If 2 or more players' cards are tied for the highest cost, the tied players repeat this process until the tie is broken. So this is an extra turn spell, and it's specifically a random extra turn spell. But because we are playing such an expensive deck in terms of mana value, it is very likely we can very frequently win the, I was gonna say clash, it's not technically clash, but kind of a clash, with Time Sifter, and then we can get a ton of extra turns. And one of the best ways we can set up the top of our deck to make sure that we don't have a land on top and have at least some chance of winning is Hidetsugu Devouring Chaos, which is 3 and a black for a 4/4 legendary creature ogre demon, and you can pay a black, sacrifice a creature to scry 2, which is perfect when comparing it with Time Sifter, but it also has an additional ability for 2 and a red. We can tap it and exile the top card of our library, and we can play that card this turn. When we exile a non-land card this way, Hidetsugu deals damage equal to the exiled card's mana value to any target. So both of these cards are very good on their own in this deck, but combined they give us a chance to deal a ton of damage and also take a bunch of extra turns. And yes, that's not exactly what some people want to be doing, so do be aware of that going into this. If you decide to put this deck together and you know that your playgroup is anti-extra turns, you might want to take out Time Sifter just because it's going to lead to some weird games. That being said, though, that brings us to the end of our cool interaction. So the final piece of our deck tech is, of course, the price of the deck. And today, our deck came in at $97.73, with the most expensive card being Scroll Rack at a massive $20.33. Now, I really pushed to keep Scroll Rack in the deck simply because it enables so many weird combos and synergies and is a tremendous value engine when we're trying to play off of the top of our library. Mainly because Scroll Rack is 2 mana for an artifact that allows us, for just 1 mana and tapping it, to exile any number of cards from our hand face down, put that many cards from the top of our library into our hand, then look at the exiled cards and put them on top of your library in any order. This essentially allows us to kind of stack the top of our deck, so when we are revealing things to Baneful Omen, or we are going to go ahead and Combustible Gearhulk somebody, we know that there are going to be lethal threats on top of our library to deal a ton of damage. And if we wind up drawing it, we can then Scroll Rack again the next turn to put it back on top, and we can just kind of guarantee we always have a way to deal a ton of damage. Now, with that being said, Scroll Rack is not necessary to the deck. You can still play without it. And to be perfectly honest, the deck is probably more fun and a little bit less competitive with that. Because if you take Scroll Rack out, you kind of have to live by the chaos of it all. Maybe you'll get what you want, maybe you won't. So if that's more your playstyle, then you could cut Scroll Rack and actually trim this deck down to about $77 instead of $97. On the other hand, though, if you're looking for a card to put into the deck that's a little bit outside of our budget range, I do have a suggestion for you there as well. Because this week, I would recommend putting in Cavern Horde Dragon and taking out Wolf of Devil's Breach. So Cavern Horde Dragon, 7 red, so 9 total mana, which is great, that's what we want. For a 6/6 dragon, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. It has flying, trample, haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. So this card is actually perfect for what we want to be doing with this deck, because it is a 9 mana spell that can be cast for as little as 2, meaning we can play an expensive card but still cast it for cheap. And it gives us a great way to ramp, because if we are ramping in this deck, then we can cast some of our super expensive spells. So Cavern Horde Dragon is actually perfect for what we're trying to do. But like I said, if you're putting a card in, you do have to take a card out, and what I would recommend replacing is Wolf of Devil's Breach, which is 3 red for a 5/5 elemental wolf. Whenever it attacks, you may pay 1 in a red and discard a card. If you do, Wolf of Devil's Breach deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to the discarded card's mana value. This is one of those cards that when I put it in here, I was like, oh, cool, this is a repeatable discard outlet, repeatable damage dealer. And then I started playtesting the deck a little bit, and I realized that it's a 5 mana spell that has to wait a turn to attack, then you have to pay 2 and discard a card, and hopefully you're dealing damage and you're not replacing the card that you discard. So 7 mana to do that is not exactly what we want to be doing, plus it's not quite expensive enough for it to be worth it for a lot of our damage dealers, so it just kind of falls flat on multiple different fronts. And that's not to say that this is a bad card by any means, I just don't think it's quite as powerful as some of our other effects, and certainly not quite as powerful as Cavern Horde Dragon. But that brings us to the end of our deck tech for today. And before we get a game in with this deck, because obviously we got to see how this deck performs in action, I want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel if that's something you're interested in doing. As always, you can just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out a lot. But if you're looking to go a little bit above and beyond, you can also find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, or right here on YouTube as a channel member. So a massive thank you to all of our patrons and channel members, and as always, I appreciate everyone who watched, regardless of whether you are a patron or just a viewer, and regardless of all of that, I appreciate you nonetheless. So, with that being said, let's move on to our game for this week. And this week, we are going to be joined by 3 opponents, as usual. And in this case, it is Bilal playing Kodama of the East Tree and Jessica, Thrice Reborn, so another partner pair at the table. We have Mort playing Duke Ulder Ravenguard, and Doodle playing Mist Form Ultimus. Starting off with Bilal's Kodama and Jessica deck, this is just a big Gruul stompy deck. He just kind of wants to drop Kodama, wants to ramp, wants to put a bunch of stuff into play, and then use Jessica to just deal a ton of damage, triple up the damage that would be dealt, and just kind of run people over with giant Gruul stompy creatures. And so this is a very powerful archetype, and Bilal is very good at playing ramp style decks, so I'm very interested to see what he's got, but also pretty scared. Moving on to Mort and his Duke Ulder Ravenguard deck. This is a deck that we have seen on the channel before. It is a myriad deck, but it also focuses very heavily on the initiative, with the idea being that if he can myriad some initiative creatures, he takes the initiative multiple times per turn and can kind of speed his way through the dungeons. So it's a very cool and unique idea. However, Duke Ulder Ravenguard, even with some underpowered creatures, is still incredibly powerful in the command zone. So I think out of all of our opponents this week, this is the deck that I'm the most concerned about. And then finally, we have Doodle playing Mist Form Ultimus, which on its face doesn't look like too much. It's just 4 mana for a 3/3 every creature type. And so you could build this as kind of an every creature type deck. You could build it as a specific creature type deck, but you will not be able to guess the creature type that Doodle is building around, because he's building around assembly workers. And when he first told us that, I was a little confused because, to be honest, I didn't even know assembly workers had enough creatures to make a deck, let alone a decent deck. But Doodle is quite the deck builder, so I am very much expecting this to be a lot better than I originally thought, because I don't even know if I could name any assembly workers, so I imagine he's going to have a lot of cards I've never seen. I'm sure there's some artifact synergies. I'm sure there's ways for him to do some crazy shenanigans, so I'm very excited for the assembly worker Mistform Ultimus deck, but I honestly have no idea what to expect. So with that all being said, let me know down in the comments who you think is going to walk out the winner today. I would love to see those predictions. Hopefully, we can do a little bit of damage with our massively overcosted spells, but let's see how it goes. So we're going to get into this game, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Bilal goes first, followed by Mort, myself, and then Doodle. On Bilal's first turn, he plays a forest. Mort plays a mountain and casts a Soul Ring. I play a mountain. Doodle plays a Path of Ancestry. Bilal plays a mountain and casts Goblin Anarchomancer, making his red and green spells cost 1 less. Mort plays a Plains and casts Selfless Spirit, which can sacrifice itself to give his other creatures indestructible until the end of turn. I play an Exotic Orchard and cast Dimir Signet. Doodle plays an island. Bilal plays a Miko Koro, Center of the Sea, then casts Rampant Growth, searching his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. Mort attacks Bilal for 2 with the Selfless Spirit, then, in his second main phase, plays a Boros Garrison, returning a Plains to his hand. On my turn, I cast a Mind Stone and play a Dimir Aqueduct, returning Exotic Orchard to my hand. Doodle plays an island and casts Worn Power Stone. Bilal casts a Soul Ring, then plays Grove of the Burn Willows and casts Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest, exiling the top card of his library when it enters because he controls 1 creature with power 4 or greater, being able to play that card until his next end step. Since he doesn't play it this turn, he moves to his end step, and Dragonhawk deals 2 damage to each opponent. Mort plays a Plains and casts Goliath Paladin, taking the initiative, searching his library for a basic land, and putting it into his hand. I cast a Rakdos Signet, then replay Exotic Orchard, and cast Hidetsugu and Kairi, drawing 3 cards and putting 2 cards from my hand back on top of my library. Then, when they die, I exile the top card of my library, have target opponent lose life equal to its mana value, and if it's an instant or sorcery, I cast it without paying its mana cost. Doodle plays an island and casts Herald's Horn, naming Assembly Worker when it enters, so all of his Assembly Workers cost 1 less to cast, and in his upkeep he may reveal the top card of his library and put it into his hand if it's an Assembly Worker. Then he casts Assembly Worker, which can tap to give target Assembly Worker +1/+1 until the end of turn. Finally, he casts Amoeboid Changeling, which can tap to give target creature all creature types or remove a creature's types until the end of turn. Bilal casts his commander, Kodama of the East Tree, so now, whenever a permanent enters under his control, he gets to put another permanent from his hand into play as long as it has the same or lesser mana value. Then he plays an Exotic Orchard, triggering Kodama, putting Game Trail into play. In Mort's upkeep, he takes the initiative, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on Goliath Paladin, then plays a mountain and casts his commander Duke Alder Ravenguard, now giving another target creature Myriad and haste when he moves to combat. This turn he targets the Goliath Paladin and uses it to attack me for 5, triggering Myriad, creating 2 token copies of the Paladin attacking Doodle and Bilal for 3. Then, when both copies enter, they trigger, allowing Mort to take the initiative 2 more times, goading Kodama and drawing a card. Finally, Bilal blocks with Dragonhawk, taking no damage, while I take 5 and Doodle takes 3. On my turn, I immediately go to combat, attacking Mort for 5 with Hidetsugu and Kairi, taking the initiative and searching my library for a basic land, putting it into my hand. Second main phase, I cast Mirror Room, creating a token copy of Hidetsugu and Kairi. The copy immediately dies to the legend rule, but I still get to draw 3 cards, put 2 back from my hand on top of the library, and then revealing the top card, which is a chain reaction, making Bilal lose 4, casting it for free, and doing 9 damage to each creature because there are 9 creatures in play. In response, Mort sacrifices Selfless Spirit to give his creatures indestructible, then the board wipe resolves, killing Hidetsugu and Kairi, so I again reveal the top card of my library, this time revealing a swamp and making Doodle lose 0 life, just to send a message. After that resolves, I cast Scroll Rack, which can tap to let me exchange any number of cards in my hand with that many cards from the top of my library. Finally, I play a mountain and pass. Doodle cast a Gilded Lotus, then cast Trophy Mage, searching his library for an artifact that costs 3 mana, in this case Cogwork Assembler, putting it into his hand. At the end of turn, Bilal activates Miko Koro, making each player draw a card. On Bilal's turn, he casts a Coveted Jewel, drawing 3 cards when it enters, and whenever an opponent attacks him with an unblocked creature, that player gains control of the jewel, untaps it, and draws 3. After that, he plays a Forest and casts Spawn of Thraxus, dealing 1 damage to me when it enters, since Bilal controls 1 mountain. Mort plays a Plains and casts Angel of the Ruins, exiling Scroll Rack and Herald's Horn when it enters. In response, I activate the Scroll Rack, exchanging 5 cards in my hand with the top 5 cards of my library. Then, Mort moves to combat, giving the Angel Myriad and haste until the end of turn. In response, though, I cast Wild Magic Surge, destroying the Angel and letting Mort reveal cards from the top of his library until he reveals a card that shares a card type with it, putting the revealed card into play. This has him putting Blood Boil Sorcerer into play, taking the initiative, revealing the top 10 cards of his library, putting a creature from among them into play with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. The card he chooses to put into play is Bloodthirster, which allows him to take an extra combat step when it deals combat damage to a player, but it can't attack a player that it's already attacked this turn. Finally, he attacks Bilal and I both for 5. Bilal blocks with Spawn of Thraxes, killing it and taking no damage, while I take 5 from the Duke. On my turn, I cast Ill-Timed Explosion, drawing 2, discarding 2, and doing damage to each creature equal to the highest mana value of the cards I discard this way. Since I discard Blood for the Blood God, which has a mana value of 11, each creature takes 11. After that resolves, I cast my commander Vial Smasher the Fierce, now doing damage to a random opponent equal to the mana value of the first spell I cast each turn. Finally, I play an Arid Archway, returning a mountain to my hand. Doodle plays an island and casts Saheeli's Artistry, creating a token copy of Bilal's Coveted Jewel, drawing 3 cards when it enters, and creating a token copy of Vial Smasher. After that, he cast a Cogwork Assembler, letting him pay 7 mana to create a token copy of target artifact, exiling the token in the next end step. Finally, he cast Mechanized Production, enchanting the token Coveted Jewel, now creating another token copy of it in his upkeep, and letting him win the game if he ever controls 8 or more artifacts with the same name. Bilal recast his commander Kodama, plays a Bonder's Enclave, then cast Orin Reef Hydra, putting a +1/+1 counter on it whenever a land enters under his control, or 2 counters if that land is a forest. In Mort's upkeep, he takes the initiative, searching his library for a basic land and putting it into his hand, then he plays a command tower, casts Swiftfoot Boots, and passes. On my turn, I attack Bilal for 2, gaining control of the Coveted Jewel, untapping it and drawing 3. Then in my second main phase, I cast my other commander Brinelin the Moon Kraken, doing 8 damage to Bilal with Vial Smasher. Then when Brinelin resolves, I return a permanent to its owner's hand, returning Doodle's copy of Coveted Jewel. Once that resolves, I cast an Izzet Signet before passing. Doodle plays an island and activates Cogwork Assembler to create a token copy of Coveted Jewel, drawing 3 when it enters. After that, he casts Mishra's Self-Replicator, allowing him to pay 1 when he casts a historic spell to create a token copy of the Replicator. This also does 5 damage to Mort with Vial Smasher. Finally, Doodle attacks Mort for 2 with Vial Smasher, taking the initiative and searching his library for a basic land, putting it into his hand. Bilal casts his other commander, Jeska Thrice Reborn, immediately activating her -3 ability to kill the Planeswalker and do 3 damage to 3 different targets, killing both Vial Smashers and Self-Replicator. Once that resolves, Bilal casts Brass's Bounty, creating 10 treasure tokens since he controls 10 lands, or at least he would have, if Doodle didn't counter the spell with a Swan Song, giving Bilal a 2/2 bird instead. Finally, he attacks me for 5 and Doodle for 6, gaining control of the Coveted Jewel, taking the initiative, drawing 3 cards, and searching his library for a basic land, putting it into his hand. Second main phase, he plays a mountain and passes. Mort plays a Clifftop Retreat and casts Balefire Dragon, immediately equipping it with Swiftfoot Boots to give it hexproof and haste. This lets him attack Bilal with the dragon for 6, but Bilal blocks with his bird token, killing it and taking no damage. On my turn, I play a Swamp, then attack Bilal for 6 with Brinelin, taking the initiative, scrying 2, and also taking the Coveted Jewel, drawing 3 cards. Before he loses the jewel though, Bilal uses it to activate Miko Koro, letting each player draw a card. Second main phase, I cast Combustible Gearhulk, returning Swiftfoot Boots to Mort's hand with Brinelin. Then, when the Gearhulk enters, Mort chooses to either let me draw 3 or mill 3, but take damage equal to the total mana value of the revealed cards. This leads to a moment that's a little bit better without my narration.
No, the correct answer is to let him draw.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm kind of not a bitch.
Oh, you're gambling? Oh!
Zach, Give it to me, baby. You're milling them. Give it to me.
Come on, baby. 26 off the top. There's a 3. It's a Chaos Warp. Hulking Metamorph, which is 9. And Split Card, which
I might be dead, y'all.
11. Take
22.
Take 24, please.
Oh my god.
Mort has me mill 3 cards and winds up taking 24 total damage because of it. After that resolves, I cast a Baneful Omen, revealing the top card of my library in my end step and making each opponent lose life equal to the revealed card's mana value. I also returned Kodama to Bilal's hand with Brinelin's trigger. Finally, when I moved my end step, I reveal a Sin Prodder from the top of my library, doing 3 damage to each opponent, knocking Mort out of the game. On Doodle's turn, he simply plays an island and passes. Bilal recast his commander Kodama, then cast Chandra Awakened Inferno, putting Regal Behemoth into play with Kodama's trigger, now becoming the Monarch and doubling the mana his lands would produce while he's the Monarch. He then activates Chandra's -6 ability, killing the Planeswalker to do 6 damage to my Gear Hulk, killing it as well. After that, he plays a Forest, putting 2 more counters on the Oran Reef Hydra, and using it to attack me for 8. This has him reclaiming the coveted jewel, untapping it, drawing 3 cards, and also taking the initiative, scrying 2. In his second main phase, Bilal cast Minsk and Boo, Timeless Heroes, putting a Tireless Provisioner into play with Kodama, now allowing him to create a food, treasure, or clue whenever a land enters under his control. Finally, he creates a 1/1 hamster token when Minsk and Boo enter, before activating Minsk and Boo's +1 ability to put 3 +1/+1 counters on the hamster. On my turn, I play an island and cast Blast of Genius, returning Doodle's Gilded Lotus to his hand, drawing 3 cards, discarding a card, and doing damage to any target equal to the discarded card's mana value. This has me discarding Skitterbeam Battalion, doing 9 damage to Bilal. After that, I cast a Keen Duelist, and follow that up by casting Sin Prodder. At the end of turn, Doodle activates Cogwork Assembler to create a total of 2 Coveted Jewel tokens, drawing 6 cards when they enter, and, more importantly, since they were created in my end step, they won't be sacrificed until Doodle's end step. Once that's resolved, Doodle casts Fact or Fiction, revealing the top 5 cards of his library, having Bilal split them into 2 piles, then choosing 1 pile to put into his hand and the other into his graveyard. This results in him putting Rings of Brighthearth into his hand, and then 2 islands, a Mindstone, and Inventor's Fair into his graveyard. Finally, I reveal the top card of my library for Baneful Omen, revealing an island so each of my opponents lose 0 life. On Doodle's turn, he casts Whir of Invention for X = 3, searching his library for an artifact with mana value 3 or less, putting it into play. This lets him get Basalt Monolith, which can tap for 3 colorless mana, and also can untap by paying 3 colorless mana. That, combined with the Rings of Brighthearth, which he also casts, allows him to generate infinite mana by tapping the monolith for mana, untapping the monolith and paying 2 additional with the rings to copy the untap ability, generating an additional mana each time he repeats this loop. With infinite mana, he's able to generate infinite Coveted Jewel and Cogwork Assembler tokens, drawing his entire library and creating infinite creatures with haste, allowing him to easily knock Bilal and I out, winning Doodle the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. We definitely did everything I wanted to do with this deck. We did a ton of damage with things like Baneful Omen, with Combustible Gear Hulk. We were able to get some damage in with Vial Smasher. We played a little bit of board control with Brinelin. And the turn where we knocked Mort out, doing a massive 24 damage with Combustible Gear Hulk, genuinely might be one of the most impactful and most entertaining highlights from any game I've ever played, because there's no way to possibly predict taking 24 damage from a Combustible Gear Hulk, so that was just absolutely amazing, and I'm very glad that that happened. Moving around the table, talking about our opponent's decks as well, Mort's deck did what I kind of expected it to do. It was definitely a threat. It definitely put itself in a position where if he had maybe chosen to let me draw 3 with Combustible Gear Hulk, I think he probably would have won. He was just generating so much value off of the initiative and doing so much damage with his myriad creatures that there wasn't much we were going to be able to do to stop him in the long run. Next up, we have Bilal, who played a very important role in the game, although not quite what you'd expect from the Gruul deck at the table. So yes, he did some damage, but a lot of times he felt like he had to stay back on the defensive, which is not where his deck wanted to be. But he did introduce the coveted jewel to the game, which wound up going around the table multiple times, was copied multiple times, and was a pretty integral part of Doodle being able to eventually win the game. And with that being said, a shout out to Doodle for, of course, his victory, so congratulations. But the ability to generate a ton of mana, make a ton of tokens, use assembly workers was not the level of power I was expecting from an assembly worker deck. So I was blown away by how good the deck was and just what he was able to accomplish. And I think that there are definitely some cards in there that were bigger threats than I realized at the time. The Cogwork Assembler, obviously, for example. But being able to generate infinite mana with rings and the Basalt Monolith definitely meant he could take advantage of those assembly workers in ways you may not expect. So I'm very happy to say that I lost in that fashion because I think that's a super cool way to lose, and I still got to do something cool in the game. So overall, let me know what you think of the game. Let me know what you thought of our deck tech and our deck in general. If you have any suggestions for future videos you'd like to see, please do let me know that as well. You can put all that down in the comments. You can email me, send them to me on Reddit or Twitter or wherever else I might be. All that is also in the video description. So with all that being said, thank you so much to everybody for watching, and I will see you on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.